Hello everyone, my name is Tom Marshall. I'm a solutions architect at Kyan. Kyan are a UK-based technology agency. We are a team of 40 strategists, designers and engineers, and we create technology that changes businesses for the better. We've been working with Kentico Content and headless CMSs for a couple of years now, and we are one of two platinum partner agencies in the UK. Our two most significant projects with Kentico Content to date are Electrorun.com, which is a marketing and e-commerce website for Electrorun, who are a provider of electrical test equipment to other businesses. They operate globally across multiple regions and languages, and that site's been live now for the best part of a year. It's a pretty large site. Their product catalogue sort of covers over 1,000 manufacturers, so I think at the time of launch certainly it was the biggest site on Kentico Content. Our other significant project is Baking Mad, which is a baking community and recipes site. Still under active development at the moment. And the thing that both of those have in common is they're both coming to content from traditional CMSs, initially with a website only, so sort of single channel web, but with multi-channel aspirations down the line. So in terms of what we're going to cover in the next 20 minutes, our experiences with content to date, those challenges that we're seeing for our clients moving from traditional CMSs to headless, how we're addressing those challenges, and how this has altered our approach going forward. So in terms of what I'm hoping that you'll be able to take away from this, for the other agencies and partners in the room, it's perhaps an opportunity to learn from our experience, and if you're just starting out, perhaps some things to avoid. For those customers that are already using content and feeling perhaps some of these frictions, maybe some ideas on how to resolve those. And for the customers not yet on content, still with traditional CMSs, perhaps the confidence that you can transition over to the content-first headless world and still keep some of those traditional CMS concepts that you'd like to. So our journey started with, we were approached by Electrorun, and they were looking to modernize their web platform into this service-based architecture, and they were looking for a partner to build out a React-based front end for Electrorun.com that was going to speak to the content headless CMS. Initially, obviously, web only, but they had these multi-channel aspirations down the line, things like perhaps a mobile app or some marketing automation. So we have lots of experience within the agency building out bespoke software and working with traditional CMSs, but headless was something that was relatively new to us at the time. So we dug in, started our research, and like with most things in the technology world, it quickly became clear that it's a world of trade-offs. The key thing with headless CMSs is separating the content from the presentation and layout that you have bundled together in traditional CMSs. And what that separation creates is opportunities for things like flexible technology selections. Because the website is separated from the CMS, you can build that in a completely different technology to the CMS itself. So you can use the right tool for the right job. The other thing it obviously opens up is multi-channel aspects. So your content is separated from HTML and those types of things, so it can be used across other channels, things like Alexas, marketing automation, mobile apps, all of those types of things. But there's also some trade-offs. By separating out that content from the presentation and layout, you obviously get that flexibility we just talked about, but you're losing that web-centric experience that content editors are used to coming from traditional CMSs. And you've just got reduced control over that presentation layout, and the editing experience isn't perhaps as direct as they're used to. So on the Electrorun project, we were working with designs that have been provided from an incumbent agency, and obviously we had the existing site to work from as well. So we were working back rather than from the ground up. And the way we approached that was we started breaking down those designs and those sites, those pages of that site into our content model. Now, we were keen to avoid the mistake of using a headless CMS, but using it like a traditional CMS and perhaps not getting those benefits that headless CMS can provide. So we dived in headfirst with what I'd refer to as a pretty strict or kind of academic approach to the content model. So as you can see here, we've got types for sort of the raw entities within the product catalog. So things like product, manufacturer, category. And then there's sort of a page element to capture, or a page type I should say, to capture any additional data that you need for pages on the web. This is pretty close to how you'd model this data for a relational database. So if we take a page as an example, this is the manufacturer's index. As I already mentioned, Electrorun have about 1,000 different manufacturers in their catalogue, and a small handful of those are featured as kind of like premium partners. Now, as a content editor, obviously on this page, they want to be able to control which manufacturers are featured and what order they're being displayed in. So how can we make this work within our sort of like strict headless model? So first of all, we need a field to feature the manufacturer. So that's just going to be a checkbox or a Boolean. That's sorted that, and then over the API, we can then separate these manufacturers out so that we can present the featured manufacturers at the top and then this kind of long tail of the rest of the manufacturers at the bottom. And then there's ordering. So Electrorun, the content editors there are going to want to be able to define the order that these featured manufacturers are appearing in. And to do that, we need another field, something like a order or an index or a weighting field. And that will be a numeric field, and it might be sort of a min and max of 1 and 100, and then content editors can specify a number, and that's the sort of an ordering that we will then sort by in order to define the ordering on the page. So this works over the API, but it wasn't very difficult for us to put ourselves in our content editor's shoes and start to imagining the challenges that they'd have managing their content with this model. Say I need to feature a new manufacturer and they need to be fourth in the list. So I need to go to that manufacturer content item, mark them as featured with that checkbox, but then I need to specify the weight. And to get them fourth in the list, I need to know what the weight of the current third one is and what the fourth one is. And if there isn't a gap in between there, I might need to shift the weights for all the subsequent items after as well. So it quickly became clear that although the developers were very happy with this approach, this wasn't going to be something that would give us a content editing experience that we'd be happy with. So we iterated and extended that. And this is where we introduced these index types. So we added additional types to our model, and something like the manufacturer's index. Typically, you're only going to create one item of that type. So we have complicated our model a little bit. But what that's given us is the ability to use Kentico's linked items to allow the content editors to specify which manufacturers are featured and in which order, and they can drag and drop those around and see it all together, which is a much better experience. And the API can still answer questions like, what are the featured manufacturers? What order should they appear in? What are the top 3 manufacturers if we need to do that elsewhere? So that worked, and that was something that we were really happy with. Something that remained a challenge in places across the site and across the model was naming. We tried to stick true to the headless concept by naming each of the elements within the design semantically rather than presentationally. So avoiding those kind of presentational names, things like, oh, it's 50/50 banner or it's carousel and those types of things. That worked quite well for the domain objects within that catalog. So things like product and manufacturer, it was quite easy to ask those questions in terms of what is this content. But on those sort of marketing and merchandising pages that typically go with a marketing site like this, we were finding it was the team there were struggling to articulate meaningful names for these areas of content. We were sort of asking questions like, if this was a Word document, what would you name this section? Or how would you describe this area of content over the phone, to try and take away those presentational names that we were getting back. But inevitably, it was a bit of a struggle in places. But we got there in the end, and we got to something that both we and the client were pretty happy with. And that's the approach that we took to launch. So launch was a great success. We had content editors across the various teams and regions updating and managing their content. So success, right? Yeah, but there's always room for improvement. As we know, and as we discussed, headless is a trade-off. And I think those trade-offs can feel particularly prevalent for content editors when they're coming from a traditional CMS and they're still single-channel web, so they're not getting those multi-channel advantages that headless provides. And that was the case for the Electrorun team. So listening to feedback from the content editors, we were hearing the same 2 challenges. They were struggling with the reduced flexibility of page layouts and that indirect editing experience that you get with headless CMSs compared to traditional CMSs. So tackling those one by one. First, that reduced flexibility of the page layouts. Coming from traditional CMSs, those content editors, they're used to having some control over the layout and presentation of their pages. The approach that we'd taken with sort of the semantic field naming and predefined templates meant that whilst they had flexibility in certain places, they could add as many carousel items as they wanted or omit sections entirely. What they weren't able to do was reorder those sections or introduce new sections for certain variants of the page. And that was something that they felt like they wanted to do in certain areas of the site. So how to solve that? I mean, our solution for this was something that we called Page Builder or Modular Sections. And essentially what it does is it gives control back to the content editors in certain areas of the site to define that layout and presentation by bringing that layout and presentation those layout and presentation concepts back into the content model. How it works is visualized a little here, but effectively you break down the page. We break down the page into horizontal slices. Each one of those slices marries up to a front-end component, and then we define a content type for that slice in Kentico Content. And then content editors are free to define as many of those components within these modular sections in any order, and they can use Kentico's linked items to drag and drop those around. And that's something that works really, really well because the actual Kentico content interface is also grouped up into these horizontal sections. So although it doesn't look like the website, that concept of this is how my page is laid out really translates quite nicely across. But we are describing our content presentationally, and that is contradictory to some of these headless values, right? And that's correct. But we think there's a balance to be found. We consider these modular sections suitable when content editors, first of all, they're asking for this freedom and flexibility to control layout. We're not looking to introduce this in areas where the content editors aren't looking for this control. And also where that content isn't naturally structured. So signs of this can be where it's difficult to name those sections meaningfully, and the names that you are getting are generally presentational rather than semantic. And also when you don't think that you're going to need to reuse that content elsewhere in future, either within the site or for another channel, except really in its entirety as a modular section. So taking events as a concrete example for that, obviously, we've got the event page here on the left, and then events can be featured around the site as well. So this is a grab from the home page where sort of the event's been featured there. And events obviously have some structured data, things like title, date, location, and agenda. And those are presented differently for different uses. As you can see here, the page is presenting the date differently to how we are then presenting it on the events home page. And then you've also got to think about the questions that you're going to ask in future. Alexa, which events are near me this week? If this structured data gets hidden into these modular sections, then you can't do those sort of things because you can't break it down to ask what the actual date of the event is. So this is definitely not something that's suitable. This structured data isn't suitable for this modular approach that we're suggesting. But that event page also has a body, and content editors may want to lay that out, put different types of thing into that for different types of event, depending on whether it's paired with a manufacturer or whether it's a first-party Electrorun event. So giving them that flexibility there to define a body is something that works, because even if you were to reuse that, say for a mobile app or something like that, the likelihood is you'd want to use that body again in its entirety. You don't need to break it down. So that's something that's a good opportunity for a modular section. The other, another area that we've implemented this in is for the sort of campaigns or landing pages that Electrorun run. So this is typically for things like offsite marketing activity, AdWords campaigns, or email marketing sends. They want to build out a page to correlate to that campaign, which is kind of that first touch point for the user when they land through. These are pretty ephemeral and don't really have much structured data to them, so pretty much the entire page is a modular section, and they've then got the freedom to define their content and lay it out exactly as they want. So that's how we solved challenge one. But what about that indirect editing experience? So the challenge here is obviously coming from a traditional CMS where the website and the CMS are wrapped up together. Content editors are naturally accustomed to an integrated editing experience that type of coupling affords. Often the job to be done for a content editor is make this change to this page. And if it's not in an area that they go to regularly, or it's an area where the content's particularly structured up, it can sometimes be difficult in headless CMSs to work out exactly where you need to go to make that change. So the solution here was less a change of approach and more using the tool to its full potential. So Kontent provides a number of different things that can help with this. So the first of those is preview URLs, which allows you to define a preview URL for any of the content types that you're creating within the headless CMS. And then what happens is a preview button is added to the editing experience when content editors are drafting new content for those types. And clicking that, together with the use of a preview environment, talking to the preview API, will take the content editors out to the website so that they can see that change that they're drafting in the context of the site itself and all of the other published content. which is great, because that's solving that problem of I'm in the CMS and I want to see what this change is going to look like when I publish it, and giving content editors the confidence to do that. The second half of that is, okay, I'm on the website and I want to change this area of it. Where do I need to go for that? And that's where the SmartLink SDK comes in. So this creates clickable regions within the pages for content editors that deep link back into content. So that's something that works universally well with the structured content and also those modular sections that we talked about earlier. And you can kind of see a bit of a mock-up of it here on the right-hand side with those kind of like edit things. You can literally go to the page, click it, and it's going to jump you into Content CMS in exactly the right place to make the change. So together, that creates that end-to-end journey that traditional CMSs have. I want to make a change to a page, I can jump into the CMS in the relevant place. I can then preview my change on the site to give me the confidence to then publish it, which is all fantastic. So something you'll already have heard and will no doubt continue to hear about today is Web Spotlight. And that's really the next step in this integrated editing experience, by taking that end-to-end journey with preview and SmartLink and bringing that into Content CMS itself. As soon as we saw this, we knew this was something that we wanted to provide for Electrorun and our other clients. And seeing features like this is fantastic for us, because it shows that Kontent are really acknowledging the reality for business users transitioning to headless, which is great for us as an implementation partner, as they're giving us the platform that we need to create solutions that our clients are after. So to summarize how we are helping our clients' content editors transition to a headless model, really our philosophy hasn't changed. We're still trying to retain the benefits of headless whilst optimizing that web experience for the content editors where possible, particularly when they're starting out in single channel web. But our approach has evolved. We're less afraid to have some layout or some presentational aspects to our model in the areas where it makes sense. And we now look to identify those early on in the process. And then finally, it's about leveraging the tools. We take advantage of Content's preview URLs, SmartLink, and Web Spotlight wherever possible, and right from the off. So that's been our journey to date with headless CMSs and Kentico Content. If you've got an interesting project coming up, we'd love to talk to you. Obviously, we've got the Q&A next, but if you'd like to reach out to discuss the merits of headless versus traditional CMSs, or just anything related to web tech really, you can reach me at tom@kyan.com. Thank you.